Good evening. Tonight, we invite you on a journey back in time to the shores of the ancient Mediterranean, to a city where knowledge was power and where human curiosity dared to build something greater than empires. We will tell the story of a place that has haunted historians and dreamers for centuries. A place that gathered the wisdom of the world under one roof, and then, mysteriously, vanished into legend. This is the story of the Library of Alexandria. The origins of the library. Alexander the Great's dream. Imagine standing on the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean, watching ships glide into the glittering port of a new city, Alexandria. It is the 4th century BCE, and a colossal ambition is taking form. Alexander III of Macedon, known to the world as Alexander the Great, was not merely a conqueror of lands. He was a conqueror of ideas, a man possessed by the dream of uniting the world, not just through force, but through knowledge. Wherever his armies marched, scholars followed, and wherever he established cities, he envisioned them as bastions of learning and culture. Alexandria was to be the jewel among them, a city where East would meet West, where philosophies would intertwine, and where the wisdom of the world would be preserved and multiplied. Although Alexander would never see his vision realized, he died young, at just 32 years of age. The seeds he planted did not wither with him. His empire fractured under the weight of its vastness, and Egypt fell into the hands of one of his most capable generals, Ptolemy I Soter. It was Ptolemy who would breathe life into Alexander's unfinished dream. Ptolemy was more than a soldier. He was a strategist of the mind. He understood that to secure his rule, Egypt needed more than fortifications and armies. It needed culture, prestige, and the unifying power of knowledge. And so, under his rule, the foundation was laid for what would become the most famous repository of learning in the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria. The library was not built in isolation. It was an extension of a larger institution known as the Mosion, a temple dedicated to the Muses, the goddesses of inspiration for literature, science, and the arts. The Mosion was a scholarly paradise, a place of lecture halls, laboratories, observatories, botanical gardens, and living quarters for the resident scholars, the first true research university in human history. But it was the library that would come to symbolize Alexandria's soul. Ptolemy, and later his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus, envisioned a place where every book, scroll, and document of importance from every known civilization would be gathered, copied, studied, and preserved. It was not simply a building. It was an idea, a sacred mission to collect all the knowledge of the world. In a world fragmented by geography and politics, the library was to be the beating heart of a universal mind, a silent yet powerful force that would shape humanity's destiny. And it all began with the impossible dreams of a young king staring out over the waters of the Mediterranean, daring to imagine a world united not by the sword, but by the written word. The secret scale. How many scrolls were there, really? Today, the numbers are staggering, and the truth is elusive. Ancient sources hint at the size of the Alexandrian library's collection, but none agree on the final tally. Some spoke of 40,000 scrolls, others claimed 400,000. The boldest estimates reached toward an almost mythical 700,000. But what do these numbers mean in the context of the ancient world? First, we must understand that a scroll was not equivalent to a book as we think of it today. A single work could span multiple scrolls. Homer's Iliad, for example, would have required several to encompass its entirety. Some scholars argue that the library counted scrolls, not titles, meaning the true number of unique works was far fewer. Even so, the ambition was breathtaking. To place this into perspective, most major city archives of the ancient world, Athens, Babylon, even Rome, might have had a few thousand documents at most. Alexandria aimed to dwarf them all. It wasn't merely a collection. It was a conscious attempt to gather everything. Every poem, every mathematical treatise, every medical text, every historical account. Not just from Greece, but from Egypt, Persia, India, and beyond. Modern historians, cautious of ancient exaggeration, tend to converge on a more realistic number, around 400,000 scrolls at the library's height. But even that estimate defies belief when considering the effort required. The transcription by hand, the fragile papyrus medium, the scarcity of skilled scribes. There is also the problem of classification. Was the library's goal to have a single copy of each work, or multiple versions, different commentaries, regional adaptations, translations? Evidence suggests the librarians, under the guidance of scholars like Zenodotus and later Callimachus, actively sought variant editions, not just originals. In this, the Library of Alexandria can be seen as the earliest advocate of the philosophy that all perspectives matter. A monumental attempt was made to organize this knowledge. Callimachus, a scholar of the Musion, compiled the Pinaeques, the first known library catalog in history. Stretching over 120 volumes, it categorized authors and their works by genre, subject, and even by the opening lines of the texts. It was a feat of intellectual architecture, almost as ambitious as the library itself. Imagine a world where every known text, sacred hymns of Egypt, epic tales of India, philosophical musings of Greece, and scientific studies from Persia, coexisted under one roof. The library was a universe unto itself, a testament to the boundless curiosity of the human mind. And perhaps most haunting of all, no single scroll survives today. Unique methods of expanding the collection. To build the greatest library in history, ambition alone would not suffice. Cunning and relentless dedication were essential. The Ptolemies, determined to fulfill the dream of universal knowledge, developed extraordinary, sometimes ruthless, methods to expand their collection. They understood one thing clearly: knowledge was power, and whoever controlled it controlled the future. One of the most remarkable tactics was employed right at Alexandria's bustling harbor. Every ship entering the port was subject to a unique decree. All books and scrolls aboard were to be surrendered temporarily to the library's scribes. These texts would be carefully copied by a specialized team. No small feat, considering the painstaking process of hand transcription. The originals, however, were not always returned. Instead, the copies were given back to the owners, and the originals were carefully catalogued and stored within the library's ever-growing walls. This practice wasn't merely an act of preservation, it was intellectual conquest. Even more audacious were the Ptolemies' literary raids abroad. Ptolemy III Euergetes, continuing his predecessor's fervor, famously borrowed the original manuscripts of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides from the great city of Athens. Supposedly paying a massive deposit to ensure their safe return, Ptolemy sent copies back instead, and chose to forfeit the sum, keeping the priceless originals for Alexandria. Acquisitions weren't limited to the Greek world. Envoys were dispatched across the Mediterranean and Near East, searching for rare and valuable texts. Egyptian temples surrendered ancient papyri. Traders brought back works from India and Persia. Jewish scholars, according to legend, translated the Hebrew Torah into Greek at the library's request, producing what would become known as the Septuagint. But this ambition also led to significant tensions. Cities began guarding their literary treasures, fearing the insatiable hunger of the Alexandrian librarians. Knowledge was no longer just a cultural asset. It had become a currency, and Alexandria was determined to be the richest bank. There's a striking irony here. A place devoted to the accumulation and preservation of knowledge was also guilty of monopolizing it. But from the perspective of the Ptolemies, the end justified the means. A library that would house the entire intellectual output of humanity, a sanctuary where no wisdom would be lost, or at least so they believed. The methods may seem harsh to modern sensibilities, but they reflected the library's grand philosophy. That knowledge was too precious to be left to chance. Secret rooms and underground archives. The grandeur of the Library of Alexandria was not limited to its towering columns or endless shelves of scrolls. Beneath the polished marble floors and sun-drenched courtyards, hidden from the eyes of the ordinary visitor, lay mysteries that have tantalized historians and archaeologists for centuries. Secret rooms, underground archives, and perhaps lost treasures of knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. The main complex of the library was part of the greater Museion, but ancient writers hint at something more, an intricate network of hidden repositories. The library, it is said, was so vast that it could not be contained within a single structure. Overflowing with scrolls, it demanded annexes, branches, and, if whispers from history are to be believed, underground vaults carved deep into the bedrock of Alexandria itself. One of the most persistent theories connects the library to the Serapeum, a grand temple dedicated to Serapis, the Greco-Egyptian deity. Built under Ptolemy III, the Serapeum stood atop the Acropolis of Alexandria, dominating the skyline. Yet it wasn't just a place of worship. Roman-era accounts suggest it housed a daughter library, a satellite collection of the original library, possibly intended as a backup, a precaution against disaster. But here's where the mystery deepens. Some ancient sources describe vast subterranean galleries beneath the Serapeum, crypts, chambers, and tunnels lined with shelves and vaults. Were these catacombs simply religious sanctuaries, or were they carefully concealed archives, safeguarding the most valuable works from fire, invasion, or political upheaval? No definitive evidence has been unearthed, yet the mere possibility continues to fuel modern legends. Archaeologists in modern Alexandria have indeed discovered a labyrinth of tunnels and catacombs beneath the city's ancient quarters, though many are collapsed or flooded. Some speculate these could have once connected to the library or its annexes. What treasures might still lie buried, protected from the ravages of time and conquest, by layers of earth and secrecy. Beyond the physical structures, there's an equally fascinating question. What kinds of texts would have been hidden away? Was there a clandestine collection of controversial or forbidden works, treatises on magic, secret histories of rulers, early works on alchemy and astronomy far more advanced than their time? Given the Ptolemies' obsession with accumulating not just popular literature, but also the most esoteric knowledge, it is not hard to imagine they would have sought to secure materials too dangerous or too precious for public display. Some even argue that the Alexandrians possessed texts that prefigured modern scientific theories, lost works on heliocentrism, early blueprints for mechanical inventions, or maps that hinted at lands beyond the known world. If these existed, the safest place for them would have been deep within the earth, far from curious eyes and idle hands. Sadly, if such secret rooms ever existed, they have remained stubbornly out of reach. Fires, earthquakes, wars, and the relentless march of time have all conspired to bury Alexandria's secrets deeper than archaeologists have yet dared to dig. But the allure of the hidden library endures. Every stone, every shattered amphora unearthed in the old city fuels hope that somewhere, in a forgotten corridor or a sealed chamber, the lost heart of the ancient world still waits, silent and intact, for discovery. Women in the Library, the first female scholars. When we imagine the scholars of ancient times, robed philosophers debating under marble porticos or scribes hunched over papyri, we often picture only men. The ancient world, after all, was largely patriarchal, and intellectual pursuits were typically reserved for them. Yet the Library of Alexandria dared to defy this norm. In its luminous halls and cloistered lecture rooms, history's first female scholars carved their names into the great tapestry of knowledge. Foremost among them was Hypatia of Alexandria, mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, and perhaps the most renowned woman of science in the ancient world. Hypatia was born around 360 CE, long after the library's golden age, yet she embodied its enduring spirit. She was the daughter of Theon, a respected mathematician and philosopher who believed that women were just as capable of intellectual greatness as men. Raised in an environment steeped in scholarship, Hypatia quickly surpassed her father's teachings, excelling in mathematics, astronomy, and Platonic philosophy. She became head of the Neoplatonist school in Alexandria, an extraordinary achievement for a woman in a society where female education was rare and often discouraged. Hypatia was not merely a figurehead. She was a teacher, lecturer, and public intellectual. Students, both men and women, came from distant cities to learn from her. They described her lectures as mesmerizing, her mind razor-sharp, her presence commanding, yet gracious. She wrote commentaries on Diophantus's Arithmetica, on Apollonius's Conics, and possibly even invented the astrolabe, an early instrument for mapping the stars. But Hypatia was likely not the only woman to leave her mark on Alexandria's scholarly legacy. The Mouseion and the library were, by design, more egalitarian spaces than many other institutions of their time. The Ptolemies, pragmatic and forward-thinking in many respects, allowed an intellectual meritocracy to flourish. Talent, not gender, was the currency that mattered most. Women from aristocratic Greek families and learned Egyptian priestesses trained in sacred rites and astronomical observations, found in Alexandria a rare sanctuary for their intellectual ambitions. Consider the powerful Egyptian tradition of female scholars and scribes. Long before the Greeks, Egypt had priestesses of Seshat, the goddess of wisdom, who were masters of mathematics, architecture, and record-keeping. It is not difficult to imagine that, under the cultural fusion promoted by the Ptolemies, these traditions persisted, and that women, well versed in astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, contributed to the life of the library in ways that history has since obscured. We can also trace the influence of the library's intellectual openness in the works of later female scholars from the Islamic Golden Age, medieval Europe, and beyond. Women such as Mary the Jewess, the legendary alchemist, and Hildegard of Bingen, the medieval polymath, carried forward a legacy of female scholarship that can, in part, be traced back to the ancient halls of Alexandria. Yet, Hypatia's tragic end serves as a stark reminder of how fragile progress can be. Amid rising political and religious tensions in Alexandria, Hypatia, a symbol of rationality, tolerance, and the classical learning embodied by the library, became a target. In 415 CE, she was brutally murdered by a mob, her death marking not just the loss of a brilliant mind, but also the symbolic end of Alexandria's ancient intellectual tradition. Her murder foreshadowed the final unraveling of the ancient world's greatest center of knowledge. And yet, her memory endures, a beacon shining through the darkness of history, whispering that in the Library of Alexandria, long before the modern world imagined it possible, women had a seat at the table of knowledge. In the marble corridors and shadowed archives of the library, voices like Hypatia's once echoed, and if we listen closely, perhaps we can still hear them. The destruction of the library. Who killed knowledge? If the Library of Alexandria was the greatest repository of human wisdom, then its destruction was the greatest tragedy in intellectual history. Yet no one can say for certain when, how, or by whose hand the final blow was struck. The truth is more complex and more haunting. Not a single night of fire, but a slow, brutal erosion across centuries, a tragedy in acts. The first catastrophe came in 48 BCE during the Roman civil wars. Julius Caesar, pursuing his rival Pompey into Egypt, became embroiled in the political chaos of Alexandria. As Caesar's forces clashed with the armies of Queen Cleopatra's brother, a fire broke out, some say set deliberately by Caesar's men to burn enemy ships in the harbor. The flames spread wildly, leaping from the dockyards to the adjacent warehouse districts. Ancient sources, including Plutarch, hint that the fire may have consumed part of the library's collection. But did it destroy everything? Modern scholars are skeptical. It is likely that the main library, deep within the royal quarter and protected by stone walls, survived the first great fire, though losses were heavy. Alexandria was a city of paper and parchment. Even a minor blaze was catastrophic. Decades later, under Roman rule, the library's fortunes waned. Successive emperors, indifferent or even hostile to Greek scholarship, failed to restore its glory. Some scholars believe that by the 3rd century CE, the library was already a shadow of its former self, diminished by neglect more than violence. Then came a second, more lethal blow in the late 4th century. In 391 CE, the Christian emperor Theodosius I issued edicts banning pagan worship across the Roman Empire. Temples were shuttered or destroyed. including Alexandria's majestic Serapeum, the satellite of the library, rumored to house thousands of scrolls. Accounts from church historians like Socrates of Constantinople describe the Serapeum's destruction in vivid terms: statues smashed, altars toppled, scrolls, if they existed there, reduced to ashes. It wasn't just the temples that fell. The classical tradition, with its deep reverence for inquiry, skepticism, and scientific observation, was increasingly seen as incompatible with the rising tide of Christian orthodoxy. Scholars were harassed, and many fled. Others, like the great Hypatia, paid the ultimate price. In 415 CE, she was murdered by a mob inflamed by religious and political strife, a chilling symbol of Alexandria's intellectual demise. And yet, even these were not the library's final eulogy. Some believe that when the Muslim general Amr ibn al-As conquered Alexandria in 642 CE, he found remnants of the library still standing. Medieval Islamic historians recount a chilling dialogue between Amr and the Caliph Omar. When asked what to do with the books, the Caliph allegedly replied, "If the books are in agreement with the Quran, they are superfluous. If they disagree, they are heretical. Therefore, destroy them." According to legend, the scrolls were used to fuel the city's bathhouses, enough to keep them warm for 6 months. Yet this story is suspect, appearing centuries after the fact and contradicting the Islamic world's later reverence for classical learning. It may well be apocryphal, a fabrication of medieval chroniclers seeking to explain the loss of the library with a dramatic flourish. The most likely truth? There was no single moment, no epic night of flames and screams. The Library of Alexandria died slowly, piece by piece, through fires, through fanaticism, through neglect and decay. It was chipped away by the shifting tides of politics, religion, and apathy. A scroll lost here, a scholar exiled there, a fire, a riot, a war. Until at last, nothing remained. And so the greatest library the world has ever known vanished not with a roar, but with a whisper. The fading breath of a civilization that had dared to imagine all knowledge under one roof. Today, standing on the cracked stones where the library once rose, one can almost hear the echoes of what was lost. The silent weeping of wisdom forgotten. The ghostly rustle of scrolls consumed by time. Myths and legends of the library. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria gave birth not only to sorrow, but to myth. In the silence left by its disappearance, imagination took root. Over centuries, stories have grown like vines around its ruins, tales of lost knowledge, forbidden science, and secrets too powerful to survive. One legend whispers that among the countless scrolls housed in Alexandria were texts that foretold the future, manuscripts of prophecy, recording the destinies of empires yet unborn. According to some, the library held the secrets of the stars, the movements of planets charted with a precision that would not be seen again until the Renaissance. Some even claim that ancient scholars knew the Earth orbited the sun, that they glimpsed the vast mechanics of the cosmos, knowledge centuries ahead of its time, snuffed out before it could alter history. Other myths speak of forbidden sciences. It is said that the library contained treatises on alchemy, the ancient quest to transmute base metals into gold and unlock the elixir of immortality. Scholars who studied there may have understood principles of chemistry and metallurgy far beyond their age. Secrets jealously guarded and, perhaps, hidden away in the library's most secluded chambers. Did the library hold blueprints for machines lost to history, primitive steam engines, mechanical computers, or devices capable of flight? According to legend, there were scrolls that described lands across vast oceans, echoes of continents unknown to the Old World, prefiguring the discovery of the Americas. Tales circulate about detailed maps, lost forever, that charted the world with uncanny accuracy, crafted from travelers' accounts and sailors' observations, long before Columbus ever set sail. Some myths even reach into the realm of the fantastical. One enduring story tells of the Book of Thoth, a fabled Egyptian text supposedly hidden within the library. It was said to grant its reader unimaginable power, the ability to speak with animals, command the elements, and even resurrect the dead. To some, the library's destruction was no accident. It was a deliberate act to prevent such dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Islamic historians added their own layer to the mythos. Some claim that fragments of the library's wisdom were saved and transported eastward, influencing the great libraries of Baghdad's House of Wisdom during the Islamic Golden Age. In this telling, the spirit of Alexandria lived on, quietly shaping astronomy, medicine, and mathematics for centuries after its physical demise. But perhaps the most enduring myth is this, that somewhere, hidden beneath the modern city of Alexandria, or buried in forgotten vaults, the lost scrolls still exist, waiting for rediscovery. Treasure hunters, archaeologists, and dreamers have long sought this intellectual El Dorado, inspired by the idea that humanity's forgotten past might yet be reclaimed. None have succeeded. Yet the library's myth refuses to die, and maybe that is its greatest legacy. For in every lost scroll, in every whispered legend, in every unanswered question, the Library of Alexandria continues to haunt us, a symbol not just of what was lost, but of what could have been. It stands as an eternal reminder that knowledge, once extinguished, leaves a darkness that no amount of longing can ever fully dispel. And somewhere in that darkness, perhaps the ghost of the library still lingers, guarding its secrets, daring us to seek them. Unknown, Scholars, and Lost Discoveries. The names we remember from the ancient world, Euclid, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, are but shadows of a much greater pantheon of minds whose brilliance was swallowed by time. Behind the luminous facade of the Library of Alexandria stood countless scholars, many of whom history has forgotten, and countless discoveries that never survived the centuries. We know of Euclid, the father of geometry, who taught in Alexandria. His Elements remains one of the most influential works in mathematics, forming the foundation of geometry for over 2,000 years. But imagine how much more he might have written, lost manuscripts on number theory, advanced algebra, or even embryonic calculus, works that vanished with the library. Archimedes, though more famously associated with Syracuse, visited Alexandria and was influenced by its scholars. His known works on levers, buoyancy, and early principles of calculus suggest that the intellectual ferment of the library provided a breeding ground for ideas centuries ahead of their time. Then there was Eratosthenes, the chief librarian himself, who calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing precision, using nothing but sticks, shadows, and mathematics. His lost works reportedly included early theories of geography and cartography, perhaps detailed maps that prefigured later global exploration, now forever beyond our reach. But what of the others? Ancient accounts mention figures like Hipparchus, the father of trigonometry, who may have developed star catalogues of astounding detail, and Heron of Alexandria, who designed primitive steam engines, the Iolipoli, centuries before industrialization. How many of their writings, diagrams, and mechanical blueprints lay hidden in the library's vaults, only to be incinerated, discarded, or lost? There are hints that the library housed advanced medical texts, dissections and surgical procedures recorded by Alexandrian physicians like Herophilos and Erasistratus, who performed some of the first human autopsies in history. Their work foreshadowed modern anatomy and physiology, but most of their writings are known only through fragmentary references in later authors, the originals consumed by the library's slow death. And perhaps most tantalizing of all are the rumors of books that reached beyond the boundaries of accepted science. Speculative treatises on perpetual motion, solar energy, optics, even the possibility of flight. Could it be that early blueprints for technology centuries, even millennia ahead of their time, were inked onto fragile papyrus in those halls? The loss is not merely academic. Without these works, human progress was delayed. Imagine if humanity had rediscovered steam power in the 2nd century CE instead of the 18th, or if the heliocentric model of the solar system had been widely known a millennium before Copernicus. How many dark ages could have been shortened? How many advances hastened? And yet, what we grieve most is not the loss of specific discoveries, but the loss of potential. The scholars whose names we will never know, the ideas that were never passed down, the genius that flickered briefly and was then snuffed out without a trace. The Library of Alexandria was more than a building. It was a crucible of human possibility. Its destruction was not just the loss of books and scrolls, but the silencing of countless minds whose echoes we can only faintly imagine. Today, when we speak of the library, we mourn not only for what was lost, but for what was never allowed to be. Technologies of copying and storing scrolls. To gather the knowledge of the world was only the first challenge the Library of Alexandria faced. The second, and perhaps even greater, was preserving it. In an age without printing presses or digital archives, every word had to be painstakingly copied by hand, every scroll protected from the relentless decay of time. The primary medium was papyrus, the lifeblood of Egyptian record-keeping. Papyrus sheets were made by slicing the stalk of the papyrus plant into thin strips, laying them in crisscrossed layers, pressing them flat, and drying them under the sun. The result was a writing surface that was light, flexible, and, crucially, fragile. Over time, papyrus would dry out, crack, and crumble, especially in Alexandria's humid coastal climate. To combat this, the library employed what we might call the first conservation techniques. Scrolls were stored in dry, well-ventilated rooms. Some historians speculate that parts of the library were designed with passive temperature control. High ceilings, narrow windows, and thick stone walls that moderated the coastal heat and humidity. Shelves and cubbies, called bibliothecae, were built to house the scrolls, each carefully labeled with wooden or ivory tags identifying the author and title. The library was not a passive archive. It was a living organism. Teams of skilled scribes and copyists worked daily, reproducing texts that were damaged or deteriorating. Ink was mixed from natural ingredients: soot or charcoal for black ink, ochre for red. Gum arabic served as a binder, ensuring that the words adhered to the papyrus without smudging or fading over time. For the most important works, there may have been multiple copies, a primitive form of redundancy. Copies would be compared, line by line, against the originals in a meticulous process known as collation, designed to preserve the accuracy and integrity of the texts. But it was not just about storage. The library pioneered the idea of cataloging on a scale never before attempted. Under the guidance of scholars like Callimachus of Cyrene, the library produced the Pinakes, a massive 120-volume catalog listing the titles, authors, genres, and first lines of every scroll. It was the ancient world's closest equivalent to a modern database, a triumph of organization in an age when knowledge was often scattered and inaccessible. Each scroll was meticulously classified by subject: philosophy, history, medicine, astronomy, drama, poetry, law. Authors were sometimes grouped by nationality, time period, or even school of thought. Such organization allowed scholars to navigate the vast ocean of knowledge with relative ease. No small feat in an age when finding a single scroll among hundreds of thousands could have been an impossible task. Beyond papyrus, the library may have experimented with more durable materials for important inscriptions: parchment made from animal skins, a medium that would later become dominant in medieval Europe. There are even whispers of texts etched onto metal or stone for permanence, though no such artifacts have survived to confirm these tales. And yet, even with all these precautions, time remained the library's most relentless enemy. Papyrus, no matter how carefully stored, was mortal. Fires, floods, earthquakes, the library was perpetually vulnerable to the whims of nature and humanity alike. In a sense, the technologies of copying and storing were an act of defiance against impermanence. Each scroll copied was a gesture of resistance, a way of telling the future. We were here. We thought. We dreamed. Today, our libraries, whether physical or digital, owe their very existence to the silent, painstaking labor of those Alexandrian scribes. They may not have defeated time, but they taught us the necessity of trying. The legacy of the library: attempts at rebirth. The Library of Alexandria may have been reduced to ashes and dust, but its spirit, its audacious dream of gathering and preserving all human knowledge, has never truly died. Across the centuries, rulers, scholars, and visionaries have tried, in their own ways, to resurrect what was lost, to rekindle the flame of Alexandria. The most literal attempt stands today on the very shores where the ancient library once rose. In 2002, after decades of planning and international collaboration, the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened its doors, a striking edifice of glass and granite. Its circular form tilts toward the Mediterranean like a great disk, as if echoing the ancient sun worship of Egypt. It is not a reconstruction, but a reimagining, a monument to the idea of universal knowledge. Inside, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina boasts space for millions of books, along with specialized libraries for rare manuscripts, maps, and audiovisual materials. It houses planetariums, museums, research centers, and an internet archive attempting to preserve digital knowledge for future generations. In this, it fulfills not just the vision of the ancient Ptolemies, but a modern one, that knowledge, in all its forms, belongs to all people, across all borders. Yet the legacy of Alexandria stretches beyond architecture. It shaped the very idea of a universal library, influencing institutions from the great monastic libraries of medieval Europe to the modern research universities and national archives. The dream of cataloging and classifying all known information, first glimpsed in the Pinakes of Callimachus, lives on in projects like the Library of Congress, the British Library, and even the endless corridors of the Internet. Alexandria's legacy also haunts our culture. The library appears in the works of countless writers and philosophers, a symbol of both human aspiration and the fragility of achievement. In the quiet halls of Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, in Carl Sagan's musings about lost knowledge and the cosmos, in Ray Bradbury's fear of censorship in Fahrenheit 451, the ghost of the library whispers. And in the age of information, its lesson is more urgent than ever. We live in a world flooded with data, but the library reminds us that knowledge is not just accumulation. It is curation, preservation, understanding. Without stewardship, information can vanish as easily today as it did 2,000 years ago. A corrupted file, a failed server, a forgotten password. Moreover, the myth of Alexandria teaches a harder truth, that knowledge can be lost not only to fire and decay, but to apathy, fanaticism, and deliberate destruction. It warns us that civilization's greatest achievements are fragile, and that each generation must choose consciously to preserve and protect them. The library's legacy is, finally, not merely in its ruins, not in the lost scrolls buried under the streets of Alexandria. It is in the very concept that no knowledge is trivial, that the human pursuit of understanding is sacred, and that the dream of a universal library, imperfect, ever elusive, is worth chasing, no matter how many times it slips through our fingers. In that dream, the library still lives. Conclusion: The Eternal Light of a Lost Library. Imagine it, a marble city by the sea glittering under the Mediterranean sun. Scholars in flowing robes crossing shaded courtyards, scrolls clutched to their chests, the air heavy with the scent of papyrus and ink, the quiet murmur of minds reaching across centuries. Now imagine it gone, ashes drifting on the breeze, silence where once there was debate, discovery, and dreams. 1,000 years of wisdom reduced to dust, scattered to the winds of history. The Library of Alexandria was not merely a building, not merely a collection of scrolls and manuscripts. It was an idea, perhaps the greatest idea humanity ever dared to build. That all the knowledge of the world could be gathered, preserved, and shared. Its destruction was a tragedy, yes, but it was also a beginning. For in the memory of its loss, humanity learned a lesson it has never forgotten, that knowledge is precious, fragile, and above all, sacred. Every library we build today, every database we compile, every archive we protect, is an echo of that ancient dream. The dream that no idea, no discovery, no whisper of human thought should be lost to the flames. And perhaps that is the true legacy of Alexandria. Not the scrolls themselves, but the enduring belief that knowledge matters, that it is worth fighting for, worth preserving, worth mourning when it is lost. Somewhere, deep under the modern streets of Alexandria, the stones that once held the library still sleep. Perhaps the scrolls are gone forever. Perhaps they are not. But the light they kindled, that fierce, unquenchable light of human curiosity, still burns. It burns every time a child opens a book, every time a scientist asks a question no one has asked before, every time we choose to remember instead of forgetting. The Library of Alexandria may be lost, but its dream is immortal.